Hello, hello Biology 111 class. This is a PowerPoint presentation about the histology slides that you will cover in lab for Biology 111 Lab Exam 1 from Chapter 3, the tissues. So let's get started. All right, epithelial tissues, the first batch of tissues. You can take a chance to read through this. Basically what it tells you is we classify them based upon the number of cell layers. That is either simple, meaning one single layer of cells, all are attached to the basement membrane, or stratified, which means there's two or more layers of cells and only one layer, the very bottom layer, remains attached to the basement membrane. And then we also classify them based upon the shape of the cell making up the epithelial tissue. If they're very flattened cells, like pancake or crepe shape in terms of the height of the cell, then we call them squamous. If they're boxy shaped or square, and they have a very large nuclei that's very prominent and easily seen, we call those cuboidal. And then the third type is a columnar, where the cells are much taller than they are wide, and the nuclei are located close to the basement membrane of the cell. So again, remember the job of epithelial tissues is, of course, to cover, protect, and allow for diffusion, transmission of materials back and forth. So here we have the simple squamous epithelium. We have two different views here. On the left, we have a top-down view looking at frog skin, not frog squid, sorry guys, frog skin. And here you can see the irregular shape. They kind of look like pancakes or crepes, so they don't have a perfectly round shape. Sometimes they do. But note that all the cells are very close to one another. We have a large, centrally located nuclei very prominently seen. And you can see that, pretty flattened looking from that. On the right-hand side is when we take a cross section through the glomerulus of the kidney. So you have to look very carefully where the arrow is pointing. There's a thin layer of cells lining that whole tube-like structure. That's the simple squamous cells. So you can see how thin they are when we take a look at a cross section through them versus looking top down at them. Let's take a look at another slide. So here's the same slide, but just a different view from a different microscope slide. So here you can see the arrows are pointing to two different types of simple squamous. One located lining the capsule, and then the layer lining the actually glomerular capillaries themselves. Here's another slide with the arrow pointing to the simple squamous. You can see the very prominent nuclei. Again, this is a cross section through tissue, so you can see how flattened the cells are. Then we have simple cuboidal epithelium. Take a very close look at where the arrow is pointing, right here. This little structure is the simple cuboidal shells. Note, very prominent nuclei located in the center of the cell. Let's take another look. Here it is blown up, and here somebody has outlined the cell shape. So there's a simple cuboidal all attached to the basement membrane. Here is the simple columnar, very tall. Now, this is a multi-layered, not multi-layered, but when we cut through the digestive tract, there's many layers going away from us. So it looks like there's multiple nuclei, but there's really just one nuclei in each of the column-shaped cells. Here's another view showing you the columnar epithelium. Then we have pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Note the arrow is pointing at the little cilia that line the columnar epithelium, and we call it pseudostratified because although each cell touches the basement membrane, they are unequal in height, so it gives the appearance that it's got multiple layers of cells. Again, another pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. And then here we have stratified. So this is when we have more than one layer of cells. You can see only one layer touches the basement membrane, and we have many layers above that. More stratified squamous. So here you can see the stratified squamous all up here, right? and then just this layer down here touching the basement membrane. Here's stratified epithelium, but this is the stratified cuboidal, or what we call transitional epithelium, because this is located in the bladder, with the idea being when the bladder is empty, these cells expand and fill the opening of the bladder, but when the bladder is full, then these cells all become compressed with the urine pressing up against them. Once the urine leaves the bladder, then they expand back out again. That's stratified cuboidal, or we call it transitional because it transitions between being squished and expanding. Here again, another form of transitional epithelium. In this case, they've been squished down. Then we get into the connective tissue. So connective tissue, of course, it connects everything together. It has an extracellular matrix with protein fibers that are usually embedded in a gel-like substance called the ground substance. It can either be liquid like blood, gel-like like cartilage, or even solid as bone. We have 5 different types. We have loose connective tissue, dense connective tissues, cartilage, bone, and blood. Now, bone and blood we mention here and we show them to you, but they are covered in Chapter 6 with the skeletal system, and in Chapter 10 with the blood system. We do not cover nervous tissue or muscle tissue. Those are covered in the relevant chapters. Chapter 7 for skeletal and smooth muscle, Chapter 11 for the cardiac muscle, and then the nervous tissue is covered in Chapter 8. So here is mesenchyme, which is a primordial connective tissue which can develop into anything. Note here's the mesenchymal cells, the collagen fibers. Then we have loose connective tissue. Note when you take a look at this that you can see both elastic fibers here and then these whitish fibers. Those are the collagen fibers, and it kind of looks loose and airy, very random in its orientation and pattern. Okay. Here you have, again, loose connective tissue. Here you can see these really prominent elastic fibers, these darker pink collagen fibers located here. Here's some cells. Okay. This is reticular connective tissue. So here you can see the dark elastic fibers. So not this area here. This is not reticular connective tissue. That's something else. This all up in here is the reticular connective tissue. Dark elastic fibers. This is a really good one. Here you can see the reticular fibers. To me, when I imagine this, I imagine like roots going through the soil. So the roots are the dark reticular fibers making their way through the soil. Then we have loose connective adipose tissue. Adipose tissue to me looks like bubble wrap. So the cell is so filled with the lipids that it pushes all of the organelles and the nucleus and everything up against the cell membrane. So it really just looks like an empty cell with an outline, but it is a truly functional cell. It's just filled with lots of lipids. Here's another picture to show you. Then we have dense connective tissue, dense regular and dense irregular. Dense meaning it's not got any space. The tissues all line up fairly regularly. Lots of fibers in here that you can see, lots of collagen fibers, very linear, very parallel fashion, very dense and thick. We find these in tendons and ligaments for support. Here again is dense regular, so you can see the very regular pattern to it. These all flow together. Then we have dense irregular connective tissue. So you still see the patterning and the lines of the collagenous fibers, but they kind of look like they've been pulled apart. So they're not that perfectly regular patterning. Patterning is there, but it's kind of a looser conglomeration of the tissue. Here's another one for dense irregular. Then we have the 3 types of cartilage. Now, cartilage is very different in that its extracellular matrix is gelatinous, and then we embed the cells inside of it, and the cells are called the chondrocytes. So here's a chondrocyte, here's a chondrocyte. Those are all chondrocytes. To me, this kind of looks like back in the day, I'm a 70s and an 80s baby, when you used to make those Jell-O molds and you used to put fruit in them. This kind of reminds me of a Jell-O mold with fruit because you can see the Jell-O and then the fruit would be the chondrocytes. Here's another really good one showing you that. So this is a gelatinous extracellular matrix, and there's a chondrocyte, or the little fruit, embedded in it. Now, surrounding each chondrocyte, sometimes there's a little opening called a lacuna. It's just a little space. Then we have elastic cartilage. So you can see the extracellular matrix has now become embedded with those dark elastic fibers. And then the chondrocytes are surrounded by the fibers. Here's another one showing you a little clearly the more chondrocytes and then the dark elastic fibers embedded in the extracellular matrix. And then here we have fibrocartilage. So you might think this looks like dense regular, but note that it's a clearer look. So the extracellular matrix has just got the collagen fiber embedded in it, and we don't see the chondrocytes as clearly, but it looks more translucent, like you can almost see through it. And here's another fibrocartilage, not quite like that one, but here you can see the fibers. There's no dark fibers like there is with the elastic cartilage, and we can see the chondrocytes quite distinctly. And then here we have bone. Just mention it here because it's one of the connective tissues. You cover this in the skeletal system. And then here we have blood. Now, blood has 3 different types of cells. It has a platelet, this little tiny spot right there. Of course, the red blood cells themselves, the lacking nucleus, donut-shaped cells with a little depression, so it looks like they have a hole, but they actually don't. And then we have the white blood cells, which have got nuclei. But you cover this again when you talk about the blood system. And that's going to conclude the tissue PowerPoint. Thanks very much.